Aimee, I'm a design recruiter from Peritus.
I'm Martin, I'm a designer at Microsoft.
And we are bringing you this video to fuse our brains together from both the designer sides and the recruiter sides of a mock interview with questions that you may be asked and ways in which we can hopefully help tailor your answer. How do you go about justifying your design decisions?
For me, as a designer, I'm very data-driven in my approach, and I've found that especially engineers, developers, they tend to agree more with me when I can actually show them that there's data to base this on, because they're usually very data-driven too. And so it's also a way to sort of get them on board and to show the reasoning behind the designs that I make.
I think what was crucial there that you pointed out is that you're a data-driven designer. You don't just kind of pluck decisions out of nowhere or designs out of nowhere to have the data to back it up is definitely something important to highlight there. I think as well, adding to that, your design process or elements of your design principles or process is also an important point, just so the hiring manager or leader of design kind of gets an overview of your design process within that as well, and also how you handle feedback. I think that's another kind of important part of the design process and how you handle that, and if that is a part of your design process as well. How do you balance the needs of the user and also the business goals at the same time?
I think especially as you move into more senior roles, if you're applying for a senior design position, you need to bring attention to the fact that you also care about the business. Mm-hmm. So if that was the sort of role I was applying for now, I would say something like, oh, but I care about, of course, the users is sort of, it's user-centered, everything we do. Having happy users means good business. But I do care about sort of the bottom line as well, and I look at KPIs, and there's usually different ways to apply designs. And I would probably bring up a project that I've worked on where I could say that I sort of made like a win-win situation where, the users were happy, but also we ended up being more profitable because you could show maybe the value to the user in a designer, in a UI way that we didn't have before. Something like that.
To what you said there that was probably most important is bringing up a specific example, although you can say, yes, I've done that and kind of give a broad overview, but if you give specific examples, even if it relates to a similar industry or project or somewhere that's most adaptable to that business environment, I think generally as hiring managers and leaders will want to see where you've been immersed in that environment and being able to, as a designer, you're balancing both and you can't always have equal parts. So where you kind of had a relevant experience, maybe overcome a challenge there. So I think that's a really important part of what your answer was there that you mentioned. Who do you collaborate with?
Of course, that is very personal, what you would answer to this one, depending on your experience. If I had more companies that I had worked for, like in the past, I would bring up probably the team and the structure that looks most like the company that I'm applying for now. Mm-hmm. So I would just imagine that it's an agency I'm applying for. I would say, well, I have actually experience from an agency a bit like this one, and that in that agency, my collaborators were other designers. We had researchers, we had project managers, and usually we structured it like this, and then go through the process. Mm-hmm. And hopefully they will nod and say, oh, that's exactly how we do it here, and they will feel comfortable that I know how to sort of work within that environment.
A good way to do that as well. We get asked this a lot as a recruiter side who designers are collaborating with to see if it exactly that mirrors what they're working with. And also I know within design, depending on how user-driven or generally how big the companies are set up, design sits with different parts of the company. So a good way to kind of mirror what you said there and find out what company setup they have is to go on LinkedIn and see if they've got a product team or see if their product managers work with designers. Sometimes they have that within their description. So it's kind of research that you can do beforehand anyway, before the interview, to see how they're set up and see if you have relevant examples to mirror this or generally have worked with similar stakeholders that they have also. Describe your design process and the methods that you follow.
Design process usually starts all the way at the research stage, and in the previous company I worked at, we had actually researchers dedicated to this, so I helped them out. I sort of learned from them and saw the analysis, and that's where I started out, because without sort of user research it's really difficult to have anything to base it on. Mm-hmm. And of course, if there's companies that don't have dedicated researchers, that's fine. I'm also comfortable sort of doing my own desk research and performing user interviews. I've done that in the past as well. And Yeah, so I think that's sort of the first part that I would mention, because that's usually important to them, that you know where to start out.
Mm-hmm.
And then you would go into a more, generic kind of design process where you can bring up maybe the apps and the tools that you use, and you say, when I have the research, then I, sketch out and I try out, sort of iterate on ideas, and I'm very sort of iterative, and you test out the flows, and you just sort of say all the things that most designers would say. But I think a lot of people skip on the research part, and it's important to touch on that, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as well, sometimes within interview, design leaders think that, or designers, sorry, think that it's a given that the person that they're being interviewed by knows that they do research, or they know that they do certain parts of the process. But unless you actually say that that is part of your design process, they're not to know. We have had rejections in the past of people saying, well, they exactly that, don't do any research. And the designer was like, I do research with every process, but they just didn't say that. And I think it's also an important point that you said around, if maybe you, do research with a UX researcher, to highlight that and what you've learned from them. Although I'm not sure whether it's the case for you, Martin, but if you do have kind of gaps with your knowledge of research, that you've worked closely with someone who is very knowledgeable in that sense, to help your design process. Another tip that I have also is on LinkedIn. Within that company, designers often have public portfolios on either their LinkedIn page, or if you search their name on the internet and put portfolio, and you'll be able to see their design process. And more often than not, that mirrors the current design process of that company. So it's a good way to kind of see who currently works there, what that design process is, and how you can adapt your answer to how they work.
And I think what I would do is sort of mirror who I'm talking to, or at least sort of level the conversation. So if I'm talking to someone who's going to be my design manager, I don't need to go through the whole sort of generic design process. They already know what a product designer does, and you can maybe highlight where your methods vary, or something interesting that you've tried that is maybe exciting to him or her to hear about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think adapting to who you're speaking with is crucial as well, to make sure that they fully understand your scope of experience, and also unique selling point. I like the point that you had there about something that you've done differently or you've tried out. Having a unique selling point definitely helps to stand out in the market at the moment. How do you measure the success of your designs?
So that's interesting. In the past, I've used both sort of business KPIs, meaning quantitative analysis, seeing, for example, in Microsoft, we have something called NSAT, which is one of those scales where you can see how you measure and how much your users like your product. That's one way. But of course, you also look at something like uptake, like how many new users do you get? And you look at maybe, can you sort of do they buy into other tiers of your product? I mean, it very much depends on the product, right? And I would, of course, say that I measure the success on the parameters that sort of align with the company that I'm applying for. And if it is a software product where they have different tiers, you could talk about ways that you can use design to sort of ease them into going maybe up a tier. And if it's something completely different, you're selling like a web shop or something like that, you can then talk about, okay, I would maybe look into Google Analytics and see sort of where do people fall off, where should we sort of make sure that they are helped along the flow, something like that.
Yeah, and I think success is measured dependent, like you said, on the company and what they're or how they measure success. And I think something you mentioned there is to kind of see how the company, what their product is, or generally how they might measure success. I think generally kind of this has come up in the past from our side, to make sure that designers are kind of seeing where there's improvement. Obviously, if you're not measuring how successful your designs are, then you don't want to kind of be a shot in the dark with the next design. Do you know what I mean? So I think it's key to have some sort of measurable success, or how you measure your own designs, to see if this can be comparable to the team itself, or just generally that you're open to having that feedback and seeing where there could be improvements.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question to ask when you show the portfolio, because a lot of the portfolio pieces are just like nice looking UI. And if you ask them, okay, so was this a success? Then they need to reflect more upon, okay, it looks great, but did it actually sort of match the user needs, or did it, it gets a bit deeper when so I love that question.
And I think it's also, just to add to that, a question to ask back to the team as well is how did they handle an unsuccessful launch or an unsuccessful project, and how they measured that, just for your own feedback as well, to kind of take that on board and potentially adapt to any future questions or when you join the team. Where do you see UX and UI going in the future, and how will you adapt to this?
I think I would jump into the AI conversation, which is very top of mind for everyone right now in 2023, and talk about how I see the tools that we use be augmented by AI, and how even everything from the research process to testing and even the products themselves will differ in the future based on AI. And I think what's important to highlight in the answer is that you are aware of what's going on. It's a way for, and I'm just saying what I think that the question is about, but it's a way to see, do you actually like follow the news within the industry? Have you been left behind? Are you doing stuff in Photoshop and Illustrator like you did 10 years ago? Are you actually following like what's going on, what's next? And for me, that's something that I always care about, sort of using the newest methods and tools. And I would just jump straight into that and have a hopefully good discussion around sort of the prospects of AI in the future.
The optimism is going to be clear to, you know, you don't want to go in there and kind of be scared of AI or kind of cautious around it. I think showing that you're optimistic to learning new tools, or just generally excited about the future of design, is going to be more engaging for whoever you're speaking with, rather than kind of shying away from that. Something that you mentioned as well that I think's a good point to add is to look at future trends and bring up any tools or anything that you think is going to shape design. They'll want any designer in their team who they think is going to kind of be either entrepreneurial or just generally shaping the way of design. Every company wants to be ahead of the game.
That's a good point. And I think it's also a way for you to show that you are knowledgeable within that specific industry. So like, let's say it's a blockchain company you're applying for, you would then say, okay, but I know that within the blockchain sector, I think these are going to be sort of the trends that we see in the future of design, because, you know, the blockchain apps, they lack these and these sort of UX and design improvements that we could have. It could also be within, you know, medical or finance or whatever, something where you say, I think that in this sector, it's specifically this and that is going to be the trend. And it's easier for them to follow along. And it also shows that you actually have an interest and that you follow along the trends in that specific sector you're applying for.
Absolutely. And some companies might even want to see if you've done research into competitors. So if you say, for example, in the medical industry, if that company is doing this and is further advanced with AI, that will go a long way if you're kind of aware of who the competitors are and how you can kind of have an edge on them as well. This was just one of the video concepts that Martin and I are putting together to help you as designers with your next step. We'd love to hear any other examples that you have. If you've been stumped, like Martin said in an interview, would like to help, we'll be happy to help you for more.